The Blues host their first preseason game tomorrow against the Chicago Blackhawks, and I do want to see a few things. I'll talk about it coming up here on Locked On Blues.
You're Locked On Blues, your daily podcast on the St. Louis Blues. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And a happy Friday, September 27th, and welcome back to Locked On Blues. I am your host of Locked On Blues, Haley Taylor Simon, talking to you all things about our St. Louis Blues here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today on Locked On Blues, I am going to talk about what I want to see the Blues do against Chicago, leadership pressure, and of course, my favorite Friday segment, Are We Feeling Blue, as usual. So we do have a lot of good stuff to talk to on today's episode of Locked On Blues. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with a $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So let's talk about everything that we need to talk about when it comes to the Chicago Blackhawks game tomorrow. First time hosting preseason game. Super excited for, the Blues to be back home finally. But I'm going to be honest with you, the past couple games, I wasn't necessarily impressed. Now, there were things that I did like. I think Zach Bolduc has been playing well. I thought, Dvorsky, fine, like not amazing, but fine, putting in effort. I really like Simon Robertson a lot. I talked about him. He's been really impressive. However, I just want to see the defense kind of come together a bit more. Now, there are players such as Tyler Tucker that weren't impressing me. Scott Perunovich really disappointed me. But I think that now with every player should have at least played a preseason game, right? That's what the third game is really for, to get everybody to play. That's why we saw Robert Thomas, Jordan Kyrou. However, we don't know who's playing tomorrow night, right? And what I hope is that we have more of an NHL roster playing tomorrow. I understand that there are some guys that you still want to see, and I can respect that. However, we are now inching closer and closer to the season. Next week is October. We're less than a couple weeks away actually from our first game, for 12 days away. Doing some math here off the top of my head. So I want to see that. Now, when it comes to our goalies, I do feel very good about Binner and, of course, Joel Hofer. But I just, I want to see more. I thought that Dylan Holloway, when he played, he actually had a really good game. So I was happy with him. Philip Broberg, I mean, he looked good. Was it like extremely impressive? Not really. I actually was impressed by Justin Folk a lot during his play. But I think Chicago, it's a really great test in a way. You're back on your home ice, and it's going to allow the Blues to really work on some things that they didn't maybe necessarily like from their preseason debuts. So I think that tomorrow's game is going to show us that. It's interesting, right? Because preseason games don't matter. And I've talked about this before, the final outcome, it doesn't matter, but at the same time, it kind of does, because while the score doesn't matter, how you play individually does. And then when you condense your roster more and more after cuts are made, you kind of need to begin seeing the teams winning. So I guess the first handful of games don't necessarily matter, but later on they do. And I think that's something that I want to kind of put out there, that I'm not worried about the fact that the Blues aren't necessarily winning. It's the lack of scoring. It's the lack of offensive pressure. It's the lack of defensive pressure that has me a little bit concerned. And I feel like the only position, again, we knew this, that I feel good about is the goalies and who's in net. I think that when you mix in some AHL type of players, and of course, in that first game, you mix in juniors players, you're going to see some sloppiness on the ice, right? Because they need time to develop and to continue to improve their game. But right now, the way that I'm looking at the St. Louis Blues team is I need more. I need to see more. We are so close to that regular season. And I don't want the same mistakes that happened last year to happen again. I think that, Dvorsky, he's such an interesting topic when it comes to this training camp, right? You know, it's a split. I see people, yes, he should say, yes, he should be sent down. I want to see him play tomorrow night because I do need to see how he is again because I keep on going back and forth. He wants to make this team. He's putting in the effort and the work to make this team. But is it going to work out for him to begin opening night? I don't know. We're opening day because 3:30 against Seattle, but you know what I'm talking about. It's just one of those things where they're mixing the combinations, which I get, but I do want to see some more NHL combinations, right? I want to see the lines. And that's one thing too about the lines that is a little frustrating during preseason because you will have maybe like, 2 out of 3 guys be NHL ready, and then you put in an AHLer, and then the line is completely just killed because every person, every player in the line, um, you know, they matter. So that's my thoughts on that one. I'm just really stressed out, to be honest, about this team because they should be and that's like the frustrating part about this, right? Is that at the end of the day, we had additions. I thought Suter played well. I just want to see more of basically the NHL roster. And I guess with preseason, you always have to kind of go in with that mentality of you're not going to see it right away. But I am happy about our newer guys. I thought the Joseph brothers actually looked fine, better than I expected for PO at least. Um, you know what's interesting though? And this is something that's kind of like a hot topic. And I'm going to talk about this later on in today's episode. Is that I feel like the leadership on the ice didn't necessarily stand out to me. I think that's also maybe a good thing during preseason. I'm going to talk about that, but I do think that might be a beneficial thing. Jordan Kyrou didn't really stand out to me much, but he played fine. But is fine good enough for preseason? I don't know because I know that all the other teams they have I don't know, they're not gonna have their NHL roster, so is it truly comparable, right? It's just a frustrating thing, and I think last game, the reason why I was so frustrated against Columbus is because you do have, your best player on the team, Robert Thomas, you know, and nothing really happened, and I think that's where my concern is that shouldn't a player that is a veteran player that's a very good player do even better because he's playing against guys that might be in the AHL. It's like, oh, I don't know. Like, this is the problem. And I knew today's episode, I was going to come on here and be a little bit frustrated. I just want the Blues to gain that confidence in preseason. And that's my other concern. What if they don't begin winning games? What if they just go on this downward spiral during preseason and then they have no confidence entering the regular season? Because I'm sure it does get in their heads. I mean, every other NHL team, I feel like, has won a preseason game besides the Blues. And again, I'm not going to come on this podcast and say, oh, the Blues are going to have the worst season ever. But it does bring up some concern that there might be some problems. And I think that's where my frustration lies. It's not that I'm trying to be negative. It's not that I'm trying to, expect the worst, so to say. It's that I'm being very realistic that, hey, even though we both know that this doesn't necessarily matter because it doesn't impact the standings or anything like that, it could also impact the players' mentalities. And I think that's another reason why I'm a little stressed about this because I don't want our players to go into the regular season with no confidence. And the preseason is supposed to have the opposite effect. It's supposed to make you feel better, more confident. And I can say, they did go 0-6 on the power play the last game, but I did see, improvements to the power play. So there are things that I'm liking. Maybe they're not scoring. I mean, they did lose 3-0. So obviously no scoring in that game. But there are positives at the same time. It's a very interesting dynamic what's going on with the Blues right now. And I do not know how to feel about it because I am absolutely stressed when it comes to this hockey team. So that is my rant right now. And what I want to see against Chicago, I want to see more of an NHL roster, and I want to see them gain that confidence. Whew. But you know, it does make me confident. That is my friends over at Indeed. If you need a hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 monthly global visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree Indeed delivers highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. One thing I love about Indeed is that it's leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day. Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences so they can help you find quality candidates better, faster, and easier for all of you listening. So join more than the 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed and hire great talent fast. And listeners of this podcast will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/locked on. Just go to Indeed.com/locked on right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/locked on. Terms and conditions apply. Need a hire? You need Indeed. Indeed, you do. So, one of the leaders of the Blues that made an impact, at least to me, was Captain Braden Shem with his beauty of a pass to Dylan Holloway, who scored his first goal as a Blue a few games ago. That was a great moment. But there is some pressure on the leadership this season. And I think that it's something worth talking about. So it all kind of stems back to a conversation that yes, it was Doug Armstrong had prior to training camp. And I want to bring this up because I think that it's actually a very important thing, because this really does kind of impact, right, the season. So obviously Captain Braden Shen, and then we have wearing the A, the alternate captains is Jay Folk, Colton Pareko, and that boy, Robert Thomas. So let me go tell you the reason why I'm going to bring this up. So basically, Dougie A was talking. He was like, yes, the leadership is going to stay the same letter wise. However, I do expect there to be a more of a role within Jordan Cairo and Bushi, which is kind of expected, right? I mean, I always thought that if something happened to Jay Folk, then Bushi would be, the newest A, right? Um, there's pressure on them this season. And I know Justin, again, injured like end of last season, so not too much on him. And I do think he had a good preseason game. But there is this sense of pressure, right? Where they do need to perform really well and they need to step up as leaders. I mean, you do have a younger team of some of the guys that you have, especially, Broberg, Holloway, Joseph Brothers, Bold Duke, Neighbors to go on, right? Hofer, even. I always forget how young Hofer is. So you do have some younger players on the team that you need to really shape and mentor. I just kind of feel like we need to see more than we saw last season. It's one thing to be, the leading scorer on the ice, but you need to step up those leadership qualities off the ice. Or maybe you're good at leading off the ice, but you need to step that up on the ice. I just feel like last year, the leadership core didn't really stand out to me. And I do like all the guys, but this is something that I thought about. These are guys that are veteran players at this point that have been with this organization for quite a while, that are getting paid big bucks to be here, and I need to see more out of them. There's no reason that some of these rookie candidates, these rookies that are, trying to make the team, are outplaying some of the guys that have been here that know what it's like. I think that training camp and the whole idea of, oh, well, I just have to show up, that's done with. And I think that was also another thing that was brought up, by Doug Armstrong. He said, the veterans are going to need to step up during training camp. And so far, I'm not overly impressed. And it all begins with the leadership. I think that the Blues are in a really interesting place as a team. because they have what it takes to be in the playoffs, right? And I don't know how many times I can reiterate that the Blues do have what it takes. They are a good enough team to be in the playoffs. However, at the same time, if they don't continue to grow and improve and stay more consistent and they end up tumbling and falling apart, then no, they don't deserve to be here despite the talent. And I feel like it's up to the leadership. Again, I don't know what goes on in the locker room. I don't know what Colton Parayko is saying. I don't know what Shen is saying. I don't know what Thomas or Folk. I don't know what they're saying. But what I do know is that even the guys that don't have letters necessarily, like a Kairu, like a Boosh, you know, just even a Binner, all of them, they need to take that accountability, Letty even, and they need to just imply this work ethic that they want to have going forward. So that way this season there's motivation there. Because again, when Berube was wrongfully fired, and I'm never going to let that go. This has nothing to do with how I feel about Drew Bannister, by the way. I just really liked Coach chief former coach of the Blues, Craig Berube, Neil, the coach of the Maple Leafs. But I just feel like they kind of let him down. Is that wrong for me to say that? Is it wrong for me to feel that way? That this team kind of let Berube down. And I feel like they can't do that to Drew Bannister because that's not fair to him. I like Drew Bannister a lot. I think listening to him speak and even, talking to him last season when he came to the city that I live in, I understand where he's coming from, right? I understand what he wants to do with this team. I understand that he's saying and doing all the right things. But at the end of the day, it's up to the players. They're the ones that are on the ice. A coach can only do so much. And it's hard for me to believe that a coach that was well respected like Berube, who I believe is going to bring the cup to the Leafs at some point, um, he wasn't the right fit eventually. And then you have a guy that worked with a lot of these players at the Thunderbirds because, again, if you didn't know, Drew Bannister used to actually be the head coach of the Thunderbirds. And he was then brought up and given this opportunity. Remember Doug was like, "Oh, I don't know what I'm gonna do with the head coach this season," and then he did give it to Bannister after all that. It was like so much drama. I'm like, why couldn't you just give the man the job like after the season ended? But it was like this whole thing. Now they're in this position where they're not winning preseason games, and I shouldn't freak out about it. And I hate that I am, but that's just how it feels right now. And I hate that I feel this way. But at least I'm being honest on this podcast and transparent because, yeah, I'm sure there might be other Blues fans that are kind of a little bit worried too, even though I know that it doesn't mean much. But I'm just saying I need to see these leaders. I need to see these veterans. I need to see them step up if the younger guys are as well. Let me talk to you about my friends over at FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season off with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. So when you get the hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. I know we suffered last night greatly, tremendously through that Giants and Cowboys game. I know the Cowboys didn't cover the spread. However, they did win. And I did tell you to bet on Cowboys money line. However, I just want to make this very clear that that was very painful for me to even say and do, but I hope you did that and won some money at least out of that. But yes, it is now week 4. I cannot believe that we're a month into the NFL season. It feels like it just began. So this is what I want you to do, okay? We have some really fun Sunday games, kind of. Not really. Like the 1 o'clock games this Sunday kind of suck. But it's fine. A game that I really want to focus on, though, that I think might be the most interesting will be the Vikings and Packers. Packers at home, Vikings on the road. This is going to be a good one. I do think, however, that the Packers are going to win, but I feel like that's like the most entertaining game out of all the games going on at the 1 o'clock slate. So I would bet the Packers money line on FanDuel or FanDuel It's my favorite Friday segment, St. Louis. Are we feeling blue? Was this a good week or was this a bad week for the St. Louis Blues? Personally, I think that this was an okay week. I'm seeing improvements. Like, I like what I saw in the power play, except they didn't score, but I'm liking what I am seeing on that. I am liking what I am seeing with some of the guys that are younger, like a Simon Robertson. I'm liking Dvorsky. I'm liking Bolduc a lot. Bolduc has been so impressive and he's so coachable and he's always improving when I see him on the ice, even at practices. So he's been someone that's been positive to me. The reason why I say it's okay-ish because there are things that frustrate me still, and I think it's the lack of pressure in the defensive zone that's a little bit bothersome, a little bit worrisome. However, I'm not gonna go in full panic mode over something that I know can be fixed and adjusted. Again, I know not all of the pairings are, gonna be the way that they are the regular season. We still have a good amount of guys that will be sent down eventually to Springfield. And for that reason alone, I know that I can't worry necessarily, but think I am allowed to be a little bit iffy. So, Blues prospect Lucas Fisher is the new captain of the Sting, which is his juniors team. So, very excited for him, by the way. So, I just want to put that out there. So, that is a positive of that day. Another thing is we do have 5 sweaters this season. We have our home, we have our away, we have our heritage, we have 90s vintage, and then we have an unknown winter classic. So that is another little positive. I like doing this segment because I get to talk about some things that are a little bit, not necessarily for a full topic of a show, but allows me to still talk about the blues and some things that I do like. So we have that going on. Another thing that I want to tell you is that we do have hockey over the weekend, home hockey for the first time. So excited for Enterprise to be rocking again and so much more. So I also want to say this that on a more serious note, the Blues put this out here today. I also got a media email about it, but I want to read this to you that the Blues are going to be paying their respects to some recent tragedies. So, St. Louis police officer David Lee will be honored with a pregame tribute Saturday ahead of Chicago. And then Johnny and Matthew will be honored with a pregame tribute Tuesday ahead of their preseason game with Columbus. So, again, to Officer David Lee, just want to give my respects and, of course, to Johnny and Matthew as well. So I just want to end on that note that if you're going to the games and things like that, definitely try to get there a little bit early. And yeah, I just want to send out my condolences and sympathies to all. So I will talk to you on Monday. And like always, how I end every single episode, let's go Blues.